You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. What if I told you that most men misinterpret women not because they're clueless, but because they're emotionally reactive? What if the very behaviors that confuse, frustrate, or even discourage you are actually quiet tests of strength, boundaries, and self-respect? And what if the men who succeed don't react at all? They understand. High-value men see what others miss. They don't argue with emotions. They don't chase validation. They don't panic when attention fluctuates. Instead, they recognize patterns, subtle behaviors that reveal attraction, respect, and intent long before words ever do. And here's the uncomfortable truth. These behaviors don't change for the man who complains, they change for the man who stays grounded. This video isn't about tricks, manipulation, or playing games. It's about perception. It's about emotional discipline. It's about seeing reality clearly, without ego, desperation, or fantasy clouding your judgment. If you've ever wondered why some men are naturally respected, while others are endlessly tested, if you felt like you're always one step behind despite doing everything right, this video will connect the dots. Watch till the very end. The final behaviors will completely shift how you interpret female psychology, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. Number 1, she tests boundaries before she trusts respect. You might hear this and feel a quiet resistance at first, but sit with it. She tests boundaries before she trusts respect. Not because she wants conflict, not because she's trying to dominate you, but because trust to her nervous system isn't built from promises or words. It's built from pressure, from resistance, from seeing whether you fold, over-explain, chase, or betray yourself the moment there's tension. And this is where most men lose their footing. They mistake testing for rejection. They mistake friction for disinterest. You don't. If you're reading this carefully, you're here to become the kind of man who stays centered when the atmosphere shifts, who doesn't flinch when boundaries are touched, and who understands that respect is often preceded by uncertainty. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology gave it a name. Wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." When she challenges a boundary, the event itself is neutral. The meaning you assign to it is everything. Do you see it as a threat to your worth, or as a moment to demonstrate self-command? High-value men don't rush to be understood. They let their consistency speak. They don't harden, but they don't soften in fear either. They remain steady. That steadiness becomes the signal. Here's the uncomfortable truth you must accept if you want to grow. Trust doesn't begin with comfort. It begins with observation. She watches how you respond when she delays, questions, withdraws slightly, or nudges against what you've stated you want or won't accept. Not to trap you, but to learn whether your words have weight. And weight is only proven when there's resistance. Seneca said, "Fire tests gold, suffering tests brave men." Boundaries work the same way. If they've never been tested, they're just decoration. You don't need to announce your boundaries like rules on a wall. In fact, the more you explain, the weaker they feel. A boundary is something you live, not something you negotiate into existence. When it's touched, you don't panic, you don't lecture, you don't withdraw affection as punishment. You simply remain aligned with yourself. Calm, unreactive, grounded. That calm response is rare, and rarity creates value. This is where trust quietly begins to form, even if it looks like tension on the surface. Notice how different this is from trying to be liked. Trying to be liked makes you porous. Everything gets in. Your time, your energy, your self-respect. Trying to be respected makes you solid. Not rigid, but rooted. Epictetus warned, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. In modern terms, this means being willing to sit in silence when you could explain yourself. Being willing to let a moment pass without fixing it. Being willing to tolerate her uncertainty without rushing to resolve it for her. That restraint is not weakness, it's discipline. You need to train yourself for this, not intellectually, nervously. Your body must learn that nothing terrible happens when you don't chase approval. Start with a simple daily practice. Notice the impulse to immediately respond, justify, or smooth things over. Don't suppress it, just delay it. Count 10 slow breaths. Feel your feet on the ground. Let the urge crest and fall. This trains emotional containment, one of the most underestimated strengths a man can develop. You are teaching yourself that you can stay present without performing. Another practice is boundary rehearsal, done privately. Sit quietly and imagine a mild challenge to something you value, your time, your pace, your standards. Don't script clever lines. Focus instead on the internal posture you want to maintain. Relaxed shoulders, slow breathing, steady gaze. You're not rehearsing words, you're rehearsing being. This aligns with the Stoic idea of mentally preparing for difficulty so it doesn't knock you off center when it arrives. When the moment comes, you won't need to act confident. You'll simply be familiar with yourself under pressure. There's a paradox here that most men miss. The more you can tolerate her testing without reacting defensively, the safer she feels. Safety doesn't come from compliance, it comes from predictability and strength. When you don't collapse under pressure, she learns that your presence is stable, and stability is what allows trust to grow. Not intensity, not charm, not constant reassurance, just steadiness over time. This also requires brutal honesty with yourself. If a boundary matters, it must be real. You can't pretend something doesn't bother you while secretly hopping at changes. That inner split creates resentment, and resentment leaks out eventually. The Stoics called this living in accordance with nature, your own nature included. If you feel friction, acknowledge it internally without drama. Then choose your response deliberately. Action without emotional noise is a powerful signal, even when nothing is said. Adopt this habit. Ask yourself, what would self-respect look like here if I removed fear from the equation? Not what would keep things smooth, not what would earn approval fastest. What would allow you to look back at your behavior later and feel aligned? Write this question down. Reflect on it weekly. This builds an internal compass so you're no longer navigating by external reactions. You'll notice something subtle as you practice this. The tests don't disappear, but they change shape. They soften. They become less frequent. Not because you demanded respect, but because you embodied it. Reminded himself daily, waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. That sentence alone can reorient how you move through every interaction. You stop managing impressions and start managing your character. If there's one final exercise to integrate all of this, it's this. Choose one small boundary this week that you will honor without explanation. No announcement, no justification, just quiet consistency. Observe your internal reactions more than external outcomes. This is where the real work happens. Over time, you'll realize something empowering. Trust isn't something you chase or extract. It's something that forms naturally around a man who is at ease with himself, even when tested. Stay with that, train it daily. And remember, every test is not a threat, but an invitation to remain who you said you were when no one was pushing you. Number 2, emotional reactions are often probes, not problems. When you begin to see emotional reactions for what they often are, not chaos, not drama, not a crisis to be solved, but probes, something inside you settles. Wrote, choose not to be harmed and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed and you haven't been. That sentence isn't about suppressing emotion. It's about refusing to misinterpret it. High-value men understand that emotional spikes are rarely the core issue. They are signals, tests, invitations to reveal who you are when pressure shows up. And the moment you stop reacting as if every emotional wave is a threat, you step into a quieter kind of power that doesn't announce itself, but is immediately felt. Most men are trained, often unconsciously, to treat emotional reactions as emergencies. A raised tone feels like disrespect. A sudden withdrawal feels like rejection. Intensity feels like instability. So they rush to fix, defend, explain, apologize, argue, or withdraw. But that rush is exactly what the probe is measuring. Not consciously, not maliciously, but instinctively. Emotional reactions often surface to answer a single question. Is this man governed by the moment, or does he govern himself? Epictetus warned, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. In other words, stop needing to prove yourself in the heat of emotion. The need to immediately respond, to correct the narrative, to regain control, that's what gives the probe its leverage. When you understand this, you stop personalizing emotional reactions. You don't label them as attacks. You don't frame them as problems that need immediate resolution. You see them as weather passing through a room, and weather doesn't require a speech. It requires structure, calm presence, consistency. A man who panics when emotions rise reveals something without meaning to, that his center lives outside himself. A man who remains steady communicates the opposite. I am not moved off my axis by intensity. That steadiness is not coldness, it's groundedness. Seneca captured it perfectly when he said, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." Delay isn't avoidance, it's mastery. It's the space where wisdom lives. Here's the part most men miss. Reacting emotionally doesn't create connection, it dissolves polarity. When you meet heightened emotion with heightened emotion, you collapse the dynamic into chaos or negotiation. When you meet it with calm, you create contrast, and contrast is where respect forms. High-value men don't rush to label emotional reactions as too much or unfair. They ask a quieter internal question. What is being tested here? My patience, my boundaries, my emotional independence. That internal orientation changes everything. You stop being dragged into the emotional current and start observing it without detachment or disdain. This doesn't mean suppressing your feelings or pretending not to care. Stoicism was never about numbness. It was about sovereignty. Reminded himself daily, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Emotional reactions are outside events. Your interpretation of them is not. The moment you interpret every emotional shift as a verdict on your worth, you lose leverage. The moment you see them as information, you gain it. High-value men respond, but they don't react. Response comes from choice. Reaction comes from reflex. To internalize this, you need practice, not theory. Start with a simple daily exercise. For the next week, commit to a pause rule. Anytime you feel the urge to immediately explain, defend, or correct yourself in response to emotion, pause for a full breath cycle. Inhale slowly. Exhale slower. Say nothing until your body settles. This trains your nervous system to tolerate emotional intensity without outsourcing control. Another exercise, journaling without judgment. Write down emotional triggers that activate urgency in you, then rewrite the moment from a Stoic lens. Ask, what part of this was within my control? What part was? This rewires perception, not behavior alone. A third practice is silence with intention, not passive silence, not withdrawal. Intentional silence rooted in self-trust. Choose moments where you allow emotion to exist without commentary. This teaches you that you don't disappear when you don't perform. Over time, this builds an unspoken authority. Seneca observed, "He who is brave is free." Freedom here is emotional freedom, the ability to let others feel what they feel without feeling compelled to manage it. High-value men also understand that consistency beats explanation. When your behavior remains grounded over time, emotional probes lose their urgency. There's nothing to test when the outcome is predictable, not in words but in presence. This is why trying to logically dismantle emotional reactions often backfires. Logic isn't the language of emotion. Stability is. You don't argue storms into stopping. You outlast them. The deeper truth is this: Emotional reactions are often less about the moment and more about safety. Safety doesn't come from reassurance speeches or emotional theatrics. It comes from embodied calm, from knowing you won't abandon yourself under pressure. When you stop seeing emotional reactions as problems, you stop shrinking yourself to solve them. You remain whole, and wholeness is magnetic. So take this with you. The next time emotion rises, don't ask how to fix it. Ask how to remain centered inside it. Practice stillness, practice delay, practice interpretation over impulse. As Epictetus said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Except now you're not reacting, you're choosing. And that choice, repeated daily, quietly separates high-value men from the rest. Number 3, inconsistency is sometimes curiosity, not rejection. You've been trained, almost unconsciously, to treat inconsistency as a verdict. A delayed reply feels like a closed door. A warm moment followed by distance feels like rejection. Your mind rushes to label it, to protect itself, to retreat, but high-value men learn something subtler, something calmer. Inconsistency is often curiosity in motion, not a final no. And the moment you truly understand this, you stop reacting emotionally and start moving deliberately. The Stoics warned against confusing impressions with truth. As one ancient line reminds us, it is not events that disturb us, but our judgments about them. When you see inconsistency and instantly translate it into rejection, what you're really doing is outsourcing your emotional stability to someone else's fluctuating behavior. That's the trap. Curiosity is rarely linear. It doesn't move in a straight line from interest to certainty. It circles, pauses, advances, pulls back, reassesses. When someone is curious, they are observing how you respond to uncertainty, not consciously testing you, but instinctively sensing whether your center holds when the rhythm changes. Here, where you separate yourself from the majority, low-value reactions crave clarity immediately. They push for reassurance. They seek explanations. They tighten their grip the moment energy shifts. High-value presence does the opposite. You allow space without resentment. You don't punish distance with silence meant to provoke guilt, and you don't chase closeness to soothe anxiety. You remain steady. And that steadiness communicates something powerful without words. You are not dependent on external consistency to feel grounded. The Stoics spoke often about inner sovereignty, wrote that your power lies in how you respond, not in what others do. When you internalize this, inconsistency stops feeling personal. You stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" and start asking, "How do I remain aligned with myself regardless of the outcome?" That shift alone changes how you're perceived. Emotional self-command is rare. It felt immediately, even if it's never articulated. Curiosity pulls back to observe. It advances to feel. It hesitates when it senses pressure. When you respond to inconsistency with calm confidence, you become a safe place for curiosity to resolve itself. When you respond with tension, urgency, or withdrawal disguised as pride, you force a premature conclusion. And often that conclusion isn't rejection, it's simply exhaustion. You didn't fail to attract, you failed to stay centered. This is why high-value men don't need constant signals. They don't monitor tone shifts like stock prices. They understand that attraction isn't maintained through vigilance but through presence. You don't need to fix inconsistency. You need to outgrow your fear of it. The moment you do, your behavior changes naturally. You speak when you want to speak, not when anxiety tells you to. You give space without keeping score. You show interest without attachment to an outcome. That balance is magnetic precisely because it's rare. There's a quiet discipline here, one the Stoics would recognize immediately. Seneca warned that neediness disguises itself as urgency. When you feel the urge to seek clarity, pause. Ask yourself whether you're acting from strength or from fear. Acting from strength feels calm even when it chooses distance. Acting from fear feels restless even when it seeks closeness. Train yourself to tell the difference. This isn't suppression, it's refinement. You don't need to reinterpret inconsistency as hope. That's not the lesson. The lesson is neutrality. Curiosity doesn't demand a response. It invites one. And you are at your best when your response comes from choice, not compulsion. When you're no longer trying to secure an outcome, you paradoxically become more compelling. Your energy stops chasing certainty and starts radiating self-trust. Here's a practical exercise to ground this understanding. The next time you notice inconsistency triggering discomfort, don't react outwardly. Do nothing for a moment. Sit with the sensation. Name it without judgment: tension, impatience, uncertainty. Then remind yourself of this Stoic truth: I control my actions, not the perceptions of others. Breathe slowly and deliberately. Let the urge pass before deciding anything. This trains your nervous system to tolerate ambiguity without panic. Another practice: write down what you believe inconsistency means. Be brutally honest. Then challenge each belief. Ask yourself whether it's a fact or an assumption. This exercise dismantles the stories that drain your composure. Over time, you'll notice that your emotional reactions soften and your responses become cleaner, simpler, more confident. And finally, cultivate a life that doesn't pause while waiting for clarity. The Stoics emphasized purposeful action regardless of external validation. When your days are full, when your identity isn't suspended between messages or moments of attention, inconsistency loses its power. It becomes background noise, not a verdict. You don't become high value by decoding every behavior correctly. You become high value by remaining internally consistent when others are not. That's the paradox. When you stop demanding certainty, curiosity has room to breathe. And even if it fades, you remain intact, composed, and forward-moving. That's real strength. That's what endures. Number 4, silence can be attraction, not disinterest. Silence can unsettle you if you don't understand it. It can trigger that old reflex to fill the space, to explain yourself, to chase clarity, to demand reassurance. But here, the shift high-value men make. You stop treating silence as absence and start recognizing it as presence. Not everything meaningful announces itself loudly. Sometimes what draws someone closer is not what you say, but what you don't rush to say. The Stoics understood this deeply. Reminded himself that the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury, which at its core is about restraint. Silence is restraint made visible. It's not passive, it's deliberate. And when you learn to sit comfortably in it, your entire energy changes. You've been conditioned to believe that interest must look like constant engagement, quick replies, emotional transparency, continuous reassurance. But attraction doesn't operate on the same rules as comfort. Attraction lives in polarity, in space, in the unsaid. When you don't panic in silence, when you don't scramble to fill every pause with validation-seeking noise, you signal something powerful. You are internally anchored. You're not dependent on immediate feedback to regulate your emotional state. That alone separates you from the majority. Seneca warned that no man is free who is not master of himself. Silence is one of the clearest demonstrations of self-mastery. You're not mute because you're unsure. You're quiet because you're grounded. Here, where most men misread the moment, silence appears and they assume loss, disinterest, rejection. They react instead of respond. They overextend. They send one more message, then another, then something clever, then something apologetic. Each attempt is driven by fear, not intention. High-value men do the opposite. You pause, you breathe. You allow the moment to exist without trying to control it. That calm creates contrast. It communicates that your sense of worth isn't negotiated in real time. Epictetus taught that it's not events that disturb us, but our judgments about them. Silence only feels threatening when you judge it as negative. Change the judgment, and the experience transforms. Silence can actually heighten attraction because it creates space for projection. When you don't over-explain yourself, when you do narrate your every thought, the other person has room to wonder. Wonder is magnetic. Curiosity is fuel. Mystery isn't about playing games. It's about not leaking your entire inner world prematurely. You don't need to withhold artificially. You simply stop oversharing as a way to secure approval. You trust that what you bring is enough without constant reinforcement. That trust is felt, even if it's never spoken. This doesn't mean becoming cold or unavailable. It means becoming selective. There's a difference. Silence paired with presence feels grounded, not dismissive. It's the silence of someone who listens fully, who doesn't interrupt emotional waves with nervous chatter. It's the silence of someone who knows that stillness often says more than performance. The Stoics practiced this through voluntary restraint. They trained themselves to endure discomfort without reacting. You can do the same. Every time you resist the urge to fill the gap, you strengthen a muscle most people neglect. Notice how your body reacts when silence appears. There's usually a tightening, a subtle urgency. That's your cue. Instead of acting, observe. Let the sensation pass. Tell yourself quietly, I don't need to move right now. That single sentence rewires your response. Over time, silence stops feeling like a test and starts feeling like neutral ground. From there, it can even become a place of connection. Two grounded people don't need constant noise to feel aligned. Wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Silence is one of those moments where this truth is tested. You don't control how quickly someone responds, how expressive they are, or how they process emotion. You only control whether you abandon yourself in the waiting. High-value men don't. You stay rooted. You continue living your life internally undisturbed. That steadiness is rare, and rarity attracts. To integrate this, practice intentional pauses. When you feel the impulse to respond immediately, wait. Not to manipulate, but to regulate. Give yourself space to choose your words instead of reacting from tension. Another exercise is silent presence. In conversations, let a thought land without rushing to add more. Allow pauses to exist. You'll notice how often depth emerges when you don't rush to the next line. Finally, journal your reactions to silence. Write down what you assume it means, then challenge those assumptions. Replace them with neutral or empowering interpretations. This trains your mind to stop empty space. Silence isn't a lack of value. It's often the container that reveals it. When you stop fearing it, you stop chasing. When you stop chasing, your energy shifts. You become less predictable, more composed, more centered. And that composure is felt long before words are exchanged. Adopt this habit deliberately. Let silence work for you instead of against you. The more comfortable you become with it, the more you'll notice something subtle but undeniable. You're no longer trying to be chosen. You're simply present. And presence, quiet and unforced, is one of the strongest forms of attraction there is. Number 5, respect grows when validation is not chased. Respect grows when validation is not chased, and you feel this truth the moment you stop leaning outward for approval and start standing inward with certainty. There's a quiet shift that happens inside you when you no longer need to be seen, praised, or affirmed to feel solid. You stop performing. You stop adjusting your posture of self-worth based on reactions. And strangely enough, that's when respect begins to form naturally around you. Not because you demanded it, not because you argued for it, but because you no longer needed it to breathe. As warned, if you seek tranquility, do less, or more accurately, do what's essential. Chasing validation is never essential, it's noise. When you remove that noise, what's left is presence, and presence commands attention without asking for it. You need to understand something subtle here. Validation seeking isn't loud all the time. It doesn't always show up as begging for compliments or reassurance. Often, it's quieter. It's the urge to explain yourself when no explanation is required. It's the reflex to soften your boundaries so you're not misunderstood. It's the impulse to prove your value before anyone questions it. Every time you do that, you send a message you didn't intend to send. I am unsure of my own worth, so I need you to confirm it for me. Respect doesn't grow in that soil. Respect grows where self-trust lives. When you trust yourself, you don't rush to be liked. You let others arrive at their own conclusions, and that patience signals strength. High-value men understand that respect is not negotiated through effort. It's revealed through restraint. When you stop chasing validation, you stop leaking energy. You speak when you mean something. You stay silent when there's nothing to add. You don't how you're perceived. Epictetus put it plainly. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. That line hits hard because it exposes the root of validation hunger, the fear of being misjudged. The moment you release that fear, you become unmovable. And when you are unmovable, people feel it, even if they can't explain why. There's also something deeply attractive about emotional independence. When you don't need constant affirmation, your actions feel cleaner, less transactional. You're not giving with a hidden expectation. You're not listening just to be liked. You're not agreeing just to maintain harmony. You're choosing. And choice is power. Respect follows power, not need. When validation is chased, it turns interactions into subtle negotiations. When validation is unnecessary, interactions become honest. Honesty over time earns respect far more reliably than charm or compliance ever could. You might notice discomfort at first when you stop chasing approval. Silence can feel heavy. Not explaining yourself can feel risky. Letting someone misunderstand you can feel like a loss. But this discomfort is not a sign of weakness, it's withdrawal. You're withdrawing from a habit that once gave you emotional hits. Seneca reminded us, "He who is brave is free." Freedom here means freedom from the compulsion to be approved of. When you no longer depend on validation, you become harder to manipulate, harder to rush, harder to control. Respect naturally aligns itself with those traits. Here, where action matters, you don't adopt this mindset by repeating affirmations or pretending you don't care. You build it through deliberate practice. Start with restraint. The next time you feel the urge to justify yourself, pause. Ask yourself if the explanation is necessary or if it's just a bid for approval. If it's the latter, let the moment pass. That pause is strength training for your mind. Another practice is selective response. You don't need to react to everything. Let some comments sit unanswered. Let some assumptions exist without correction. This isn't passivity, it's discipline. It's choosing where your energy goes instead of handing it out reflexively. You can also train this through internal validation. At the end of the day, review your actions, not how they were received. Ask yourself if you acted in alignment with your values. Did you keep your standards? Did you speak truthfully? Did you remain composed? Wrote, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. When your self-assessment becomes primary, external validation loses its grip. Respect begins internally, then radiates outward. Another exercise is intentional silence, not the awkward kind, but the grounded kind. Sit with moments where you could add something and choose not to. Feel the urge rise, then fall. Notice how little actually collapses when you don't fill the space. Over time, you'll realize that your presence doesn't diminish in silence, it sharpens. People listen more closely when you speak less. They weigh your words differently. That's respect forming in real time. As you continue this practice, something important happens. You stop trying to be impressive and start being consistent. Consistency is what people trust. Trust is what people respect. You're no longer swayed by praise or shaken by indifference. You remain steady, and steadiness is rare. In a world full of emotional bargaining, the man who doesn't chase validation feels solid, grounded, and unmistakably self-directed. So take this seriously, not as a tactic but as a way of being. Let go of the need to be confirmed. Let your actions stand without commentary. Let your worth be assumed, not argued. As Epictetus advised, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. When you do, respect won't need to be demanded. It will arrive quietly, stay longer, and deepen with time. Number 6, she mirrors the emotional standard you set. She mirrors the emotional standard you set. Sounds simple on the surface, but when you really sit with it, you realize it's one of the most quietly powerful dynamics in any interaction between you and a woman. And it's one that only high-value men truly understand, not intellectually but viscerally. You don't control her emotions. You don't manage them. You don't react to them like they're storms you need to survive. You set a standard, and that standard becomes the emotional gravity of the space you occupy. As wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. When you embody that, everything changes. Here's the uncomfortable truth most men avoid. The emotional tone of your interactions is usually a reflection of you. Not your words, not your intentions, not what you meant to say, but your inner posture. Your calm, your urgency, your certainty, your anxiety, your steadiness. Women are exceptionally attuned to emotional undercurrents. They feel before they analyze. So when you bring composure, groundedness, and emotional self-command into a room, that becomes the baseline. She doesn't rise because you demand it. She rises because there is nothing lower to settle into. You are the reference point. If you're reactive, she feels permission to be reactive. If you're centered, she unconsciously matches that rhythm. If you're unbothered, present, and emotionally self-contained, the interaction stabilizes around you. This isn't manipulation, it's alignment. Epictetus reminded us, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. When you decide the kind of emotional man you are and live it consistently, you stop chasing responses. You start setting climates. A high-value man doesn't rush to explain himself emotionally. He doesn't spike his tone to be heard. He doesn't collapse into overvalidation or withdraw into coldness. He remains steady. That steadiness communicates safety, not in a soft or submissive way, but in a grounded, unshakable way. And when that's present, a woman naturally calibrates herself to it. Her emotional expression becomes clearer, calmer, more respectful, not because she's trying to impress you, but because chaos finds no foothold in your presence. What most men miss is that emotional leadership has nothing to do with dominance or control. It has everything to do with regulation. Seneca put it plainly, "He who is brave is free." Emotional bravery is the willingness to stay present without needing to win, fix, or flee. When you don't flinch at emotion, yours or hers, it loses the power to destabilize the interaction. You stop being pulled into emotional turbulence, and instead, you become the still point it moves around. This requires discipline. You don't wake up one day magically calm. You train it. You notice when you're rushing to respond. You catch yourself when your tone tightens. You pause when your ego wants to prove something. You breathe when silence feels uncomfortable. Over time, your nervous system learns a new default. And once that default is set, people feel it immediately. Women especially. They sense that you are not emotionally hungry, that you are not seeking reassurance, that you are not dependent on their reactions to feel solid within yourself. And here, where the mirror becomes unmistakable, when you stop escalating emotionally, she often stops too. When you don't dramatize, drama loses oxygen. When you don't chase clarity through overtalking, clarity emerges naturally. When you stay grounded, her emotional expression becomes more measured, more intentional. Not always instantly, not perfectly, but consistently over time. Because you are no longer reacting to the wave, you are the shoreline. This is why high-value men rarely argue in the way most people do. They don't get pulled into emotional spirals. They don't weaponize feelings or defend against them. They acknowledge without absorbing. They remain warm without becoming porous. That balance is rare, And rarity commands respect without ever asking for it. As advised, be like the cliff against which the waves continually break, but it stands firm and tames the fury of the water around it. That isn't poetic fluff. It's a blueprint. To live this, you must practice setting your emotional standard deliberately. Start with awareness. Notice your internal state before, during, and after interactions. Ask yourself, am I calm because I choose to be or because nothing is challenging me right now? There's a difference. True emotional leadership shows up under pressure. When something doesn't go your way, when there's ambiguity, when there's silence, when there's intensity. Your job is not to suppress emotion, but to contain it without leakage. Here's a simple daily exercise. Once a day, intentionally slow your responses, not out of strategy, but out of presence. Feel your breath before you speak. Let your words come from clarity, not urgency. Another practice, when you feel emotionally charged, don't act immediately. Sit with the sensation. Name it internally. Let it pass without narration. You're teaching your nervous system that it doesn't need to outsource regulation. Another powerful habit is setting an internal rule. You do not explain your emotional state unless it genuinely serves clarity. Not to be understood, not to be validated, just when it's useful. This alone will elevate how others engage with you. Emotional restraint is not coldness, it's precision. Over time, you'll notice something subtle but profound. Interactions feel lighter, more respectful, less volatile, and you didn't demand that shift. You embodied it. That's the essence of high-value presence. You don't ask the world to treat you differently. You give it a different emotional experience of you. So take this seriously. Not as a trick, not as a tactic, but as a personal standard. Decide who you are emotionally and live it consistently. Let your calm be non-negotiable. Let your reactions be intentional. Let your presence speak before your words ever do. When you do this, you won't need to chase emotional alignment. She will meet you where you stand, because you've made it the only place that feels stable. As the Stoics understood long ago, mastery of self is mastery of influence. And when you set the emotional standard with quiet confidence, the mirror reflects it back, every time. Number 7. Availability decreases perceived value. You already sense this, even if you've never put words to it. The moment you are always available, always responsive, always ready to adjust yourself around someone else's timing, something subtle shifts. The energy changes, respect softens, curiosity fades, not because you did something wrong, but because value is inseparable from boundaries. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus warned that the one who hands over control of his time hands over control of his life. Availability, when unmanaged, quietly communicates that your time is inexpensive. And when your time feels cheap, so does your presence. This is one of those female behaviors only high-value men truly grasp, not with resentment, but with clarity. You're not being punished for caring. You're being tested to see whether you value yourself enough to remain anchored. You have to understand this without bitterness. Perceived value is shaped by scarcity, not performance. The more available you are, the less space there is for anticipation. When you show up instantly, every time, you remove the tension that keeps attraction alive. You collapse mystery into predictability. High-value men don't confuse presence with overexposure. They know that desire grows in the pauses, in the unanswered moments, in the calm absence that says, "My life is full," and you're invited into it, not centered at its core. Wrote about guarding your inner citadel, your mental and emotional space. That citadel includes your time. When you protect it, you're not withdrawing affection. You're communicating self-respect. Notice how this isn't about playing games. Games come from insecurity. Discipline comes from self-command. When availability is unlimited, it signals that nothing else competes for your attention, not your purpose, not your growth, not your inner standards. And that signal is always read, even if it's never consciously acknowledged. A man who understands this doesn't become cold or distant. He becomes deliberate. He chooses when to engage, when to respond, when to step back into silence. Silence, as the Stoics taught, is not emptiness. It's strength under control. It's the refusal to react compulsively. You need to internalize this. Attraction is not created by effort alone. It's created by contrast. When your presence is constant, there is no contrast. When your energy is always accessible, it stops feeling earned. High-value men understand that women often don't respond to words about independence. They respond to demonstrated independence. Not loud independence, not performative detachment, quiet independence. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that simply exists. When you don't rush to fill every gap, you allow space for interest to expand naturally. This is where Stoicism grounds you. Seneca spoke often about moderation, about knowing when enough is enough. Availability without moderation becomes self-betrayal. You begin shaping your day around someone else's reactions, someone else's pace. And the moment you do that, you subtly lower your own rank in your mind. Others feel that drop immediately. You don't need to explain why you're unavailable. Explanation is often a bid for approval. High-value men don't justify their boundaries, they embody them. Your calm refusal to be endlessly accessible says more than any speech ever could. You may feel the urge to prove interest, to reassure, to show consistency. Resist the urge to. Consistency doesn't mean constant presence. It means emotional steadiness. You can be warm without being omnipresent. You can be interested without being consumed. This distinction changes everything. When you master it, you stop chasing reactions and start setting a rhythm. And people naturally adjust to your rhythm when it's grounded in self-respect. Here's the deeper layer most men miss. Decreasing availability isn't about withholding, it's about redirecting. You're not removing energy, you're reinvesting it. Into your mind, into your body, into your standards. When your life feels full to you, it becomes compelling to others. That fullness is magnetic. The Stoics would say you're aligning with nature, your own nature, acting from wholeness rather than hunger. When hunger leads, availability spikes. When wholeness leads, availability becomes intentional. You can feel this shift internally before it ever shows externally. You stop checking. You stop waiting. You stop measuring your worth by response times or attention cycles. You move when it's aligned, not when it's anxious. That inner stillness is what recalibrates how you're perceived. Remember, people don't respond to what you say you value. They respond to what you protect. To integrate this, start with simple, disciplined practices. First, reclaim your time consciously. Each day, block periods where you are unreachable, not as a tactic, but as training. Sit with the discomfort that arises when you don't immediately respond. That discomfort is your dependency loosening its grip. Second, practice delayed response, not out of strategy, but out of presence. Respond when you're grounded, not when you're restless. Let your nervous system learn that nothing collapses when you don't react instantly. Third, conduct a nightly reflection as did. Ask yourself where you gave away your time today without intention, not with judgment, with curiosity. Awareness precedes change. Another exercise is internal anchoring. When you feel the pull to be overly available, pause and repeat a Stoic reminder. I control my actions, not outcomes. This pulls you back into agency. You don't need to manage perception aggressively. You need to manage yourself consistently. Lastly, train selective engagement. Choose one interaction per day where you prioritize depth over immediacy. Fewer words, more presence. Less explanation, more certainty. Understand this fully. Availability decreases perceived value only when it's unearned and unconscious. When your availability is chosen, it becomes powerful again. High-value men don't disappear. They don't manipulate. They don't punish with silence. They stand still. They live fully. And they let others feel the weight of their presence precisely because it isn't always there. Adopt this, not to control anyone else, but to reclaim yourself. When you do, everything else recalibrates naturally. Number 8, confidence is read through behavior, not words. Confidence is not something you announce, it's something you demonstrate without trying. High-value men understand this deeply and women sense it instinctively. You can say all the right things, choose impressive words, even sound persuasive on the surface, but confidence isn't processed through language, it's read through behavior, through stillness, through how you carry yourself when no validation arrives. As reminded himself, waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. That line alone dismantles the idea that confidence needs explanation. You don't convince, you embody. When you understand this, your entire approach shifts. You stop trying to prove strength and start refining it internally. Women don't respond to declarations of certainty. They respond to the absence of neediness, the lack of urgency, the quiet self-trust that doesn't lean forward for approval. Confidence shows up in how you pause before responding, how you don't rush to fill silence, how you remain grounded even when outcomes are unclear. You don't chase reactions. You don't over-clarify your intentions. You don't adjust yourself mid-moment to be liked. This is behavioral confidence, and it's unmistakable. The Stoics were relentless about this idea. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." Confidence follows the same law. The moment you explain it, you dilute it. The moment you try to signal it verbally, you expose the insecurity underneath. High-value men don't broadcast certainty because they don't need feedback to stabilize themselves. Their behavior already communicates it. They move with internal alignment, and that alignment is felt before a single word lands. You need to understand that women are not listening for confidence, they are watching for congruence. Are your actions aligned with your words? Are your reactions steady? Do you remain consistent regardless of external approval? Behavioral confidence is revealed in how little you flinch, in how rarely you feel compelled to defend your choices, in how you don't perform strength, you live it quietly. This is why loud certainty often repels. It's trying too hard to be seen. True confidence is comfortable being unnoticed. There's a calm authority that emerges when you stop narrating yourself, when you trust that who you are doesn't require explanation. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." Behavioral confidence is freedom in motion, freedom from the need to persuade, freedom from emotional overreaction, freedom from external control. When you act from that place, women don't need reassurance. They sense stability, and stability is magnetic. This is where most men struggle. They think confidence is volume, assertion, dominance in speech, but those are often masks. Confidence is restraint. It's choosing not to react impulsively. It's letting things unfold without interference. It's being rooted enough to allow silence to exist without panic. When you speak less but act consistently, your presence becomes heavier. Not aggressive, grounded, unshakable. You cultivate this by shifting your focus inward. Stop asking how you're perceived and start asking whether you're aligned. Stop trying to manage impressions and start managing your state. The Stoics didn't train themselves to impress. They trained themselves to be unaffected. And that emotional independence is what modern confidence is built on. When your behavior no longer bends to external stimulus, you become predictable in the best way, steady, composed, reliable in your reactions. Now comes the work, not theory, practice. Start with a daily discipline of stillness. Each day, intentionally slow your responses. When emotion rises, pause. Let the impulse pass without expression. This isn't suppression, it's mastery. You're teaching your nervous system that you don't need to react to feel secure. Over time, this rewires how you move through interactions. Another exercise, reduce verbal justification. For 1 week, remove unnecessary explanations from your speech. Say what's needed and stop there. Notice the discomfort. Sit with it. That discomfort is where false confidence dissolves and real confidence forms. You're learning to let your decisions stand on their own. Practice outcome detachment. Before any interaction, remind yourself that your worth is not tied to a response. This is straight from Epictetus, who taught that peace comes from focusing only on what's within your control. When you release attachment to results, your behavior naturally relaxes, and relaxed behavior reads as confident. Finally, commit to internal standards. Write down what you respect in yourself, values, boundaries, principles, and act in alignment with them daily. Confidence grows when you keep promises to yourself. Every time you act according to your own code, your behavior gains weight. You don't need to speak confidence when you live it consistently. Confidence is not a performance. It's a byproduct of self-trust repeated over time. When you understand that women read behavior, not words, you stop trying to convince and start becoming. And once that happens, your presence speaks long before your voice ever does. Number 9, she notices how you treat limits more than how you treat her. When you really understand attraction at a deeper level, you stop obsessing over how you treat her and start paying attention to how you treat your limits. This is one of those quiet truths most men never see. She is watching how you handle boundaries, not because she wants conflict, but because boundaries reveal who you are when comfort is no longer guiding your behavior. You can be warm, attentive, playful, even generous. But if your limits collapse the moment they're tested, something inside her takes note. Not consciously, not maliciously, but instinctively. High-value men grasp this without needing it explained. They understand that limits are not walls, they are definitions. And definitions create clarity, safety, and respect. Once wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." That sentence isn't about morality alone, it's about self-alignment. When you abandon your limits to be liked, you fracture that alignment. She feels that fracture even if she can't articulate it. You feel it too in the subtle tension that follows. What she notices isn't whether you say yes or no, but whether your yes is rooted in self-respect and your no is delivered without guilt or aggression. Limits, when held calmly, signal inner order, and inner order is deeply compelling. Here's the part most men misunderstand. Boundaries are not performative. You don't enforce them to teach a lesson or prove dominance. You hold them because they are yours. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus reminded us, "No man is free who is not master of himself." When you compromise your limits to preserve approval, you surrender mastery. And the irony is that the more you chase closeness by erasing yourself, the more invisible you become. She notices when your standards bend too easily, when your rhythm adjusts too fast, when your values soften under pressure. Not because she wants you to be rigid, but because flexibility without a core feels unstable. You don't need to announce your limits. You don't need to explain them endlessly. In fact, the more you justify them, the weaker they appear. Limits are most powerful when they are lived, not argued. When you act in accordance with them consistently without resentment, something shifts. Your presence steadies. Your words carry less noise and more weight. You stop negotiating with yourself in real time, and she senses that you are not trying to win her favor. You are simply being yourself, unedited. This is where high-value men separate themselves. They understand that attraction grows in an environment of emotional safety, and emotional safety comes from predictability of character, not compliance. If your behavior changes depending on who is watching, there is no anchor. But when your limits remain intact regardless of circumstances, you become grounded. Seneca put it plainly, "He who is brave is free." Courage here isn't loud, it's quiet consistency. It's the willingness to disappoint in the short term, rather than betray yourself in the long term. Notice how different this feels when you embody it. There's less internal debate, less second-guessing. You're not asking, "Will this make her like me?" You're asking, "Is this aligned with who I've decided to be?" That shift alone changes the energy you bring into every interaction. You're no longer trying to manage perception. You're expressing identity, And identity is magnetic because it doesn't beg for validation. Now let's make this practical without turning it into performance. One exercise is simple but uncomfortable. Spend a few minutes each day observing where you mentally override your own limits. Not externally, internally. Where do you tell yourself you should be okay with something when you're not? Where do you rationalize discomfort to maintain harmony? Write it down briefly without judgment. The goal isn't action yet. The goal is awareness. Stoicism always begins there. Another practice is limit rehearsal, not in behavior but in language. Quietly formulate one calm sentence you could say when a boundary is reached, without defensiveness or explanation. You don't need to use it. You just need to know you could. This builds inner readiness. Confidence often comes not from action but from preparedness. When you know you can hold your line, you stop fearing the moment it might be tested. Finally, train yourself to pause. Limits are often broken not because you lack standards but because you react too quickly. Insert a breath, a moment. Urged, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. That pause is power. It's the space where choice lives. The more you practice it, the less likely you are to abandon yourself under pressure. Remember this. She may enjoy kindness, affection, and attention, but she respects coherence. She notices how you treat limits because limits reveal your relationship with yourself. When you honor them calmly, without apology or force, you communicate something rare. You are not governed by fear of loss. You are guided by inner law. And that, more than any tactic or charm, is what high-value men quietly understand and live by. Number 10. Calm indifference signals strength more than approval does. Calm indifference is one of the most misunderstood signals of strength, and yet it's one of the clearest markers of a high-value man. Not coldness, not arrogance, not withdrawal. Calm indifference is something quieter, steadier, and far more powerful. It's the inner posture that says, I am complete whether this moment goes my way or not. And paradoxically, that is exactly why it commands respect. When you understand this, you stop chasing approval without needing to announce that you've stopped. You simply move differently. You breathe differently. You respond instead of react. Most people are conditioned to believe that approval is currency. Get enough of it and you feel safe. Lose it and you feel exposed. But the moment you begin to rely on approval, you give away leverage over your emotional state. You start adjusting yourself, your words, your tone, your timing, to earn something external. That subtle hunger is always felt, even when it's hidden behind confidence or charm. Calm indifference breaks that pattern. It doesn't seek validation and it doesn't reject connection either. It just refuses to need it. That refusal is not defensive. It's grounded, and groundedness is magnetic. The Stoics understood this deeply. Wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Calm indifference is the lived expression of that idea. You are not unmoved because you don't care. You are unmoved because your sense of self is not tied to the outcome. Approval becomes optional, not essential. And when approval is optional, it loses its power to control you. What many men miss is that indifference is not something you perform. The moment you try to act indifferent to get a reaction, you've already lost the posture. That's still approval seeking in disguise. Calm indifference grows from internal alignment. It's what happens when you know where you stand with yourself, when your values are clear, when your standards are not up for negotiation in every interaction. You stop over-explaining. You stop rushing to fill silence. You stop trying to be impressive. And strangely, that's when you become most impressive. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." That line cuts straight through the need for approval. Calm indifference accepts misunderstanding without panic. It allows someone else's opinion to exist without rushing to correct it. You don't need to prove your worth because your worth is not a debate you're participating in anymore. You listen. You observe. You choose when to engage and when to let things pass. This selective engagement is a form of power that can't be faked. Here's the deeper layer most people never articulate. Calm indifference creates emotional safety, not through reassurance but through consistency. When you're not swayed by praise or shaken by disapproval, your presence becomes predictable in the best way. You are steady. You don't spike emotionally. You don't collapse inward when energy shifts. That steadiness communicates maturity, self-trust, and emotional containment. It says, I can handle myself. And someone who can handle himself doesn't need to control anyone else. This is why approval often weakens attraction rather than strengthening it. Approval says, I am looking to you for confirmation. Calm indifference says, I am already confirmed. One posture asks, the other allows. One leaks urgency, the other holds space. And space is where respect grows. You're not trying to win favor. You're simply showing up as you are, unattached to how it's received. Seneca warned, he who depends on another for happiness has surrendered control. That sentence alone could reshape how you move through every interaction. Calm indifference is the reclaiming of that control. You still feel, you still care, but you don't outsource your emotional equilibrium. You don't let external reactions dictate your internal state. You remain centered even when things are ambiguous, uncertain, or unresponsive. To embody this, you must first make peace with discomfort. Approval feels good. Indifference at first can feel like standing without a safety net. There may be moments of silence where you'd normally speak, pauses where you'd normally explain, restraint where you'd normally lean forward emotionally. These moments are not emptiness, they are training grounds. Each time you resist the urge to seek validation, you strengthen your self-trust. Each time you let an outcome unfold without interference, you reinforce your composure. A practical way to train this is through intentional non-reaction. Choose small moments each day where you consciously pause before responding, not to manipulate but to check in with yourself. Ask quietly, am I about to speak to express truth or to gain approval? If it's the latter, let the moment pass. Silence, when chosen deliberately, sharpens presence. It teaches you that nothing collapses when you don't chase. Another exercise is outcome detachment. Before any interaction, remind yourself that the result does not define you. Say it internally, feel it. Then proceed without rehearsing, without bracing, without hopping. This doesn't make you passive, it makes you free. You act from intention instead of anticipation. Over time, this rewires how you experience connection altogether. You can also train calm indifference through attention discipline. Notice where your mind goes after an interaction. Are you replaying words, interpreting reactions, looking for signs? Each time you catch yourself doing this, gently redirect your focus back to something within your control, your breath, your posture, your next action. Reminded himself, the tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say, or think, or do. That tranquility is cultivated, not granted. What emerges from this practice is not detachment from people, but attachment to principle. You become anchored in who you choose to be, not how you're perceived. That anchoring changes everything. Your words carry less need and more weight. Your presence feels relaxed but intentional. You don't rush connection and you don't resist it either. You let it meet you where you are. Calm indifference is not about playing hard to get. It's about being hard to move internally. When you reach that place, approval becomes a bonus, not a requirement. And that shift, subtle, quiet, almost invisible, is exactly what separates men who seek validation from men who naturally command respect. The invitation is simple but not easy. Stop leaning outward for confirmation and start standing inward with certainty. Practice it daily. Feel the difference. And let your calm do the speaking for you. Before you leave, remember this. High-value men don't chase clarity, they create it. The behaviors you've just learned aren't tricks, tactics, or manipulation. They're signals. signals that reveal who you are before you ever speak. Most men react, high-value men observe. Most men explain, high-value men embody. And that's why these behaviors make sense to you now. Because you're no longer looking for validation, you're building presence. If this video shifted even one perspective, don't let it stop here. Rewatch it, sit with it, apply it in silence. The real power isn't knowing these behaviors, it's remaining composed when they appear. That's where attraction, respect, and leverage quietly form. If you want more content rooted in calm confidence, emotional discipline, and timeless Stoic wisdom applied to modern relationships, make sure you subscribe. Like the video so it reaches men who need it, and comment below which behavior opened your eyes the most. Remember, when you master yourself, everything else adjusts around you. Stay steady, stay selective, and I'll see you in the next one.